Let's chat about the top 64 most wanted Star Wars characters revealed for the 2025 TVC March Madness voting tournament. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there. Thanks for visiting Varykino. I'm Kristy.
And I'm Matt. The team behind TVC March Madness have revealed the top 64 characters wanted for the TVC line in this year's Vintage Collection voting tournament.
The Vintage Collection March Madness tournament is an online fan initiative to find the top character figures most wanted by collectors all around the world.
March Madness has been running for a few years now, started and organised by the crew at SWTVC on Instagram.
The team reportedly worked through over 30,000 top 25 list submissions with over 2,000 characters to collate.
Even before the tournament voting begins in March, this ordered list gives us an interesting insight into the popularity of characters that fans are hoping to add to their TVC collection this year.
We submitted our own top 25 list back in January. We discussed our picks in a separate video which we will link down below. We are so excited to see the top 64, which were presented in reversed order of votes tallied, counting down to the most voted for character for this action figure line.
Today we're going to quickly run through the 64 characters from that reveal and chat briefly about our thoughts for each, as well as running through how many of our picks made it through to the top 64.
We'll start with number 64 and count down to the most voted for in the number 1 position.
Number 64, KB from Skeleton Crew. Obviously, this is a new media title, so it's not surprising to see her included because she hasn't actually been made in the Vintage Collection line yet.
Wim and Fern just missed out on the top 64 cutoff. It makes sense that KB made the cut because she is a little bit more unique with her cybernetic implant, though of course we do want all of the kids from Skeleton Crew in the Vintage Collection line eventually.
Number 63, Yachts Oren, the Skiff Guard. This guy is going to be popular amongst those that are setting up a bit of a display that incorporates skiffs and Jabba's sail barge.
Of course, during the release of every Star Wars trilogy, there was 3 years between each release where Hasbro could kind of catch up and make figures from the latest film. But now in the Disney Plus era, where we're getting new series and animated series every year, sometimes multiple times a year, Hasbro is really racing to catch up. So of course, a few of those really cool alien creatures, background characters from the original trilogy are getting a little bit left behind in the constant pace to keep up with the new media. It's really fun to see a background alien character like Yachts here from Return of the Jedi making it so high up this year's list.
Number 62, the Galactic Marine from Episode 3. Now, clone variants, of course, are always very popular, but this guy has some very unique aspects to his armor and to his helmet. So he's not just a variant of the standard Clone Trooper armor, and we haven't seen this version in quite a while now.
Of course, this year is the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith, so it's no surprise to see a unique Clone Trooper from Episode 3 appearing on this list. And I'm sure I'm not the only one hoping for quite a few Episode 3 figures released this year to celebrate the anniversary.
Number 61, Clone Captain Rex from the planet Selos, as seen in the Rebels animated series.
While of course we do have quite a few figures of Captain Rex, he is a very popular character. I'm sure I'm not the only one that would love a new multi-articulated version of Captain Rex from Rebels to put alongside his classic iconic white and blue armor. I love Rebels, but of course the figures released during that time were that animated 5-point of articulation style that doesn't mesh very well alongside the Vintage Collection figures. So I really hope that Hasbro adds this one to their to-do list.
Number 60, 2-1B, the medical droid from The Empire Strikes Back. Now, I'm a big 2-1B fan. He has been made a few times before in the 3.75-inch scale, but all of them had, slight issues in terms of overall accuracy. So I'd love to see some real attention to detail coming through in a new version of this figure.
I think the Vintage Collection line would be perfect for really rendering all those unique details. He has a lot of tubing and of course those clear sections in both his head and abdomen. I think that would just be absolutely perfect to tackle in the Vintage Collection line.
Number 59, Ezra Bridger as seen on Peridea in the Ahsoka live action series. This is the version of him where he's wearing his sort of a nomadic garb. Quite a distinct look from as he appeared in the Rebels series.
Now, I was going to put this one on our wish list as well, but I do consider this one to be a when not if decision for Hasbro. They have made quite a lot of figures from the Ahsoka live action series. It's really popular amongst collectors, so I do see this one as being not too far off, so I didn't really need to put this one on my list because I do consider it pretty much a given. Just when it's going to come out is the question.
Number 58, the Pike Soldier or Soldiers from the Book of Boba Fett. These guys are key adversaries in the Book of Boba Fett. They show up in a number of episodes. They're an interesting character visually. There are quite a few variations amongst the soldiers in terms of the markings on their faceplates, for instance, but even just one of these that we could sort of use as a stand-in for army building would be appreciated.
I do have a sneaking suspicion, though, if Hasbro released the Pike Soldier, they might do it as an army builder 4-pack, so that they could just release 4 figures using the same body and slightly different paint for those masks, like they kind of gave us with the Night Trooper pack. Those were really cool, but we yet to get them on a backing card.
Yeah, frankly, if anything can be army builded, I'm not actually averse to it being released in an army builder pack down the line at some point.
But I do think that Hasbro should release every figure on an individual backing card for the mint on card collectors as well. It seems like an obvious choice.
Number 57, Caloran Beck is played by Ahmed Best in the Book of Boba Fett. This is the first one from our list of 25 that has made it into the list of 64.
This feels like an obvious win for Hasbro. People love background Jedi characters because they can create customs from them. He has quite a unique look. The classic prequel robes are there, but he's got some gold detailing and unique sleeves as well. And of course, 2 different color lightsabers. I think he looks really visually cool. I think the backing card would look amazing. And of course, while technically he's in the Book of Boba Fett, he is in a flashback set during Order 66. So he actually ties in a little bit more, shall we say, with episode 3, which is celebrating its anniversary this year. So I think that would be a fun one of kind of bridging the gap between the slightly new media of the Book of Boba Fett, as well as tying into the anniversary of episode 3. I think it's the perfect choice, and I'd love to see more merchandise of Caloran Beck, just on the whole.
Number 56, Amina Man from Jabba's Palace in Return of the Jedi. Now, this character has been made a couple of times in the 3.75-inch scale, going right back to the vintage era. When he first appeared in the 1980s, he was considered to be a little bit of an obscure character because there wasn't a lot of media that showed him particularly clearly, but a lot of fans know about this character, and he is quite a necessary addition if you want to fully fill out your Jabba's Palace scene.
From my perspective, the 2 Star Wars scenes that everyone wants to really fully flesh out are the Tatooine Cantina and the Jabba's Palace scene. So, of course, those really fun, really unique background characters are, of course, going to be very high on everyone's list because you cannot just head swap and create some interesting background creatures for something like this. He is so unique, and I think he would just be so fun to see on a modern vintage collection backing card as well.
Number 55, General Grievous from Episode 3. Now, the first question here is whether or not he can be done as a single standard figure or if he needs to be done as a deluxe figure to fully give him all of his lightsabers and accessories such as his large flowing cape.
But I think this would be a perfect choice for Hasbro to release. Again, being the 20th anniversary of Episode 3, he is such a unique standout character from the film. And of course, the vintage collection I think would do really well with all of his fine detail and complicated articulation.
Now, we've seen General Grievous done in this scale a few times before in the past, but it would be very interesting to see if the modern production techniques would give us the definitive version. Number 54, Padme Amidala from Attack of the Clones as seen on Geonosis.
The March Madness team mentioned they combined the 3 variants of Padme's white outfit here, where she was wearing her cloak in the droid factory, the cloakless version from the arena, and then the 3rd ripped version as well. So all 3 of those votes were combined into this entry. They also went over some of the other Padme costumes that just missed out on the cut. In second place, that didn't quite make it, was the Theed throne room gown from episode 1, that gorgeous red one with lights around the hem. In third place was the Theed battle, also known as the Battle Maiden, towards the end of episode 1. And the one that I put on my list came in 4th out of the Padme gowns, the Lake Dress from Naboo from episode 2. This was the highest unmade version of Padme, so I'm really happy to see that there are lots of other collectors that also do want the lake dress in action figure form, because this one has never been made in action figure form at this point. Number 5 was the Liberty Dies outfit, Imperial Declaration. In 6th place was the Episode 1 Tatooine, her blue disguise. And 7th place was Mustafar. Personally, I wouldn't mind if Hasbro released a Padme figure like every month because she has so many outfits. I'm a little bit disappointed to see Geonosis being the highest voted one. Of course, the arena is a really great army building scene and she is so important, but we do have quite a few versions of this outfit in action figure form. I was really hoping to see a Padme outfit that hasn't yet been made, but I would buy quite a few of this Padme Amidala white outfit if Hasbro would make it. I would buy a couple to open and a couple to keep mint on cards. So I'm happy to see Padme on this list.
Number 53, the 5th Brother Inquisitor from Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now this is an interesting instance where the Black Series got quite a wide range of the Inquisitor characters, but they haven't made their way into the Vintage Collection line yet.
While the Inquisitor faction is relatively new when we compare it alongside Jedi and Sith, but I think it has really quickly gained momentum in terms of collectors really liking these characters. They look really cool alongside Palpatine and Vader and Stormtroopers. They've got really unique red lightsabers and they do look really cool when you put them together. So far, I'm only able to do that in the Black Series line, but of course I love the 3.75-inch line as well. I really need to build out my squad of Inquisitors in this scale as well.
So Hasbro has to kind of realize that when people tend to want characters that come as a team, such as the Inquisitors, they generally want all of them. So if the 5th Brother has significant demand like this, that's probably the tip of the iceberg, and there are a lot of fans that want to build the whole set of Inquisitors. Speaking of Inquisitors, number 52, Marok from the Ahsoka series. Now Marok was a bit of a lone agent and he had a bit of an abrupt ending in the series, but I think he is quite popular because of the design of his armor. He has some very interesting elements to his helmet and his overall armor design that sets him a little bit apart from some of the other Inquisitors. I think he's quite visually appealing and would quite like to see this one in the Vintage Collection line myself.
Hasbro has been pretty good about giving us a good steady variety of figures and characters from the Ahsoka live action series, so this is another one that I'm fairly certain that is more of a when not if decision for Hasbro to release. He looks cool, he was kind of mysterious, and I really like building out the fight scenes from the Ahsoka live action show.
Number 51, Supreme Leader Kylo Ren from Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Obviously, this is the version where Kylo Ren has his reforged helmet with all of the red lines over it.
Of course, I would really want them to do the detail lines on his helmet with actual sculpted lines accented with red, not just simply painting red over an old sculpt of the helmet. And of course, this would be perfect if they would give us a swappable helmet and head, so we could also do Kylo Ren without his helmet on, because he often fights with it off in this film.
Number 50, Mon Mothma from the Rebel briefing room prior to the attack on the second Death Star and Return of the Jedi. It's kind of interesting that we saw this version of Mon Mothma from Return of the Jedi released in a wave of figures from the Retro Collection line, with that old school style sculpting, but we haven't seen a nice updated live action version of her in quite some time.
There are quite a few versions of Mon Mothma across different films. We see her in Rogue One, and of course she has multiple different outfits in Andor and in animated series as well, but of course this is her first iconic appearance. It makes sense that this is the one that's going to get the highest on this fan voting list, though I do hope we do see an Andor version along the line as well.
Number 49, Ki-Adi-Mundi from the prequel trilogy. Now Ki-Adi-Mundi is a prominent Jedi Council member who has some significant lines in the prequel trilogy, and he is also one of the Jedi that we do see out in the field engaged in combat.
Even if you don't collect every Star Wars figure, I think a lot of fans do like collecting Sith and Jedi characters because lightsabers just always look cool when posing for action figures. And of course Ki-Adi-Mundi is one of those ones where we do actually see him engaged in combat, so he does get to pull out his lightsaber compared to quite a few of the other Jedi Council members where the only scene that we can really put them in is sitting in their chairs, which is a little less interesting for display. And of course, again, the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith, it would be nice to put him alongside some clone troopers and finally build out that scene.
Following on from that Supreme Leader Kylo Ren figure at number 51, we have at number 48 Ben Solo as seen on Exegol in episode Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. This is in some ways a little bit of a plain figure in terms of his costume design, but obviously there is enough popularity for him to hit the number 48 spot in this list.
Ben Solo was one of our top 25, so I'm really happy to see him within the top 50 on the full 64 finalist list. I really want to build out that final conflict on Exegol with Palpatine, Rey, and Ben Solo, but Ben Solo is missing. He is so important. I really do want him in action figure form.
Number 47, Jeki Lon from the Acolyte. Now, we have a few of the Jedi characters from the Acolyte and Vintage Collection line, but Jeki is obviously absent at this point in time. I think the fact that she is a member of a team helps boost her popularity amongst those that want to fill out their team of Jedi from this series.
While Jeki is wearing fairly standard Jedi robes, she is of course an alien species, so that gives her a really interesting head sculpt. And of course, as you said, Jedi work really well in a squad, in a setup. We've got a few from the Acolyte. I think should be a really fun addition to the current lineup, and I do hope that we get all of the Jedi characters from the Acolyte in the Vintage Collection line eventually.
Number 46, the Endor Rebel Commando from Return of the Jedi, who was first seen as a vintage Kenner figure back in the early 80s.
This is another figure that I know would be popular with army builders or just fans wanting to build out the scene, and it's interesting that Hasbro didn't give us a tie-in carded figure released around the same time as they released the Endor Bunker playset. I thought that would be really obvious. If fans are going to buy the bunker, they're going to want to buy some other figures to flesh out that scene. Hopefully this one's not too far down the line.
Yes, this character could either be done as an army builder pack as well as a single pack. You could even build in capability to construct a few variations on a single standard carded figure by having mix and match components such as backpacks and some of the other accessories that this character has. Number 45, EV-99 from the dungeon scenes in Jabba's Palace in Return of the Jedi. Again, this is a great character to help build out all of those background denizens from the Jabba's Palace scenes, and it's also a droid that has quite a unique design compared to some of the other droids that we have available in the Vintage Collection line. It was a very fun figure when it came out back in the 80s in the original Kenner lineup. Had an articulated mouth that was activated by a little lever on the back of the head. I don't know if that's a feature that we would see in an upcoming release, but there's certainly an opportunity for something interesting like that.
A unique droid design that is quite prominent in Return of the Jedi and has some really fine detail that I think the Vintage Collection would do really well.
Number 44, Garandan the Kubaz, working as an Imperial spy in Mos Eisley in Star Wars A New Hope.
Garandan is one of those characters that appears on a lot of wish lists when you're talking about the HasLab Mos Eisley Cantina playset, and while he doesn't connect completely to that playset, he does tie in to the wider Return to Tatooine theme that Hasbro has been teasing for this year.
Number 43, Dash Rendar from Shadows of the Empire. Now, this is the only Shadows of the Empire character to show up on the Vintage Collection list in the top 64, of course. We are seeing some Shadows of the Empire characters coming through in the Black Series line, so I'm hoping that he might be just a bit of a representative of a push for more Shadows of the Empire characters across both lines.
Even though it's been decades since the multimedia tie-in of Shadows of the Empire came out, Dash Rendar is one of those characters that kind of rises above their source material, much in the way that Darth Revan has wider appeal than just those players that played Knights of the Old Republic and knew about the character from the video game. It's fun to see Dash Rendar so high on this list. I think perhaps partly because of the release of Prince Shizor in the Black Series line. It's reawakening an excitement for potentially more figures from Shadows of the Empire. He recently was added as a playable character in the app game Galaxy of Heroes, so I think that certainly helps keep his presence in the wider expanded universe for fans to get to know him. I think this would be really fun and popular, much in the way of Starkiller appearing in the Vintage Collection line. These are stories and video games and comics that aren't fitting in the modern Disney canon, but they are still very popular with collectors and fans alike.
Number 42, Agent Kallus from the Rebels animated series. There are a few versions that could be done of this character, but I think his Imperial armor would be a great starting point.
Like the older Captain Rex from Rebels, this was one of those characters that was released in the original Rebels era in that animated 5-point of articulation style that just doesn't work alongside the modern action figure lines. He was so central central. He went through quite an interesting story arc, and while of course I do want his Rebel version, the Imperial one would be a great starting point.
Number 41, the Trandoshan bounty hunter Bosk from The Empire Strikes Back. Now, of course, the bounty hunters from The Empire Strikes Back are all incredibly popular. Everybody loves to sort of have a bit of a lineup of all of them. So it took us a bit of a moment to just check our memories and to realize that this character hasn't actually been done in quite some time, and certainly not in the Vintage Collection.
Of course, all of those Empire Strikes Back bounty hunters are cool, and I think every fan wants to collect that lineup no matter what format and scale you collect. But Bosk does get a little bit more airtime, shall we say, with his inclusion in other video games and comics. He's just a little bit more present. We even see him in the Clone Wars animated series. So I think that this would be perfect and a really obvious choice for Hasbro to reissue him in the Vintage Collection line.
Number 40, Fozek, the Palace Guard from Jabba's Palace in Return of the Jedi. Now, Fozek has never been done in an action figure form at all historically. He is a background character, but he does play a little bit of a role because he is the guard that presents and guards both Princess Leia and Han Solo to Jabba once Han Solo's been released from the Carbonite and they have been captured by Jabba.
While this character won't have wide appeal to younger fans, they probably won't recognize this one if they spot it on their toy store shelf. Of course, fans and collectors really love to build out those dense scenes like the Mos Eisley Cantina and of course Jabba's Palace. Because he is so central in the frontier with Jabba's Palace, he would be perfect to really fill out those scenes.
Number 39, Ezra Bridger from Rebels, the Lothal version.
Well, of course, technically we did actually get a fairly recent figure of Ezra Bridger as seen in Rebels. This was a pack-in with the HasLab Ghost vehicle, which has Ezra depicted at the end of Rebels with his shorter hair, different outfit, as we see him on that incredible Rebels mural. So, of course, if you really want to build out the Phoenix Squadron from Rebels, I think one of the most distinctive looks for Ezra was his Season 1 look when he gets his lightsaber and he has that longer hairstyle and that distinctive blue-black hair as well. And of course, I really do want to go through and replace the full lineup of Rebels figures, those 5-point of articulation animated style figures that we got during the original Rebels run. I really want to build out the full Rebels lineup in the modern Vintage Collection line. And of course, it looks really cool alongside that HasLab Ghost as well.
Number 38, Pirate Captain Brutus from Skeleton Crew, another character that hasn't been done because he is coming in from new media. Pirate Captain Brutus seems like quite a popular character based on what we've seen online in terms of being a very interesting alien who plays a significant adversary role in the show.
Brutus has quite a detailed look, both in the sculpt of his alien features as well as his pirate outfit. And of course, with Skeleton Crew being at this point the most recent media we have, I'm really hoping it's just a matter of time until we get all of the major characters from the show in the Vintage Collection line.
Number 37, Shasa Teal, the Ishi-Tib from Jabba's Palace. This is another background denizen that has never been made in action figure format, and I think that is why there's a little bit of demand coming from those that want to build out their Jabba's Palace scene with everybody in a degree of accuracy, and they can't do it if there are missing characters such as this one.
Ishi-Tib are one of those fun creatures from the original trilogy era that you can kind of put in the background of lots of different Star Wars scenes. So even if you buy one to put in your Jabba's Palace scene, I could envision picking this one up a few times to add a random Ishi-Tib in the background of many other Star Wars scenes. They're just a fun alien to really add in that kind of Star Wars feel to different denizen scenes.
Number 36, the Frog Lady from The Mandalorian.
The Mandalorian as a series has a pretty heavy representation in the Vintage Collection line. We have some really obscure background characters coming through in action figure form, but Frog Lady was featured quite heavily in an episode, so it's kind of surprising she hasn't been made in the Vintage Collection line. I think fans really like collecting the Mandalorian because, of course, we've got that really cool HasLab Razor Crest to really anchor a display around. So I think this would be quite a fun one to add to anybody's collection.
Number 35, Qui-Gon Jinn from Episode 1 of The Phantom Menace.
Of course, we did get a lot of Qui-Gon 3.75-inch figures in the Phantom Menace era, but of course they do look a little bit dated alongside the modern Vintage Collection era, and I think Qui-Gon is high up on this list at 35 because of the nostalgia about seeing him once again in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. I, for one, always wish that we saw more of Qui-Gon Jinn in live action form. Maybe, fingers crossed, if we're lucky enough to get more from the Obi-Wan Kenobi series sometime in the future, maybe we could have more of Qui-Gon in Force Ghost form. But of course, I'm very nostalgic about the Phantom Menace era. That Duel of the Fates fight scene is always iconic for action figure building scenes, so it's really fun to see Qui-Gon Jinn at 35 on this list.
Yes, historically he has been quite abundant. It is just a little bit odd that we haven't seen a nice updated version recently. Number 34, the Clone Commando. This character is included at this point with the knowledge that he would be the base for almost any Clone Commando or Republic Commando character to come subsequently. There's a lot of scope for reuse of this character in this mold.
I think this would be a really fun and obvious choice for Hasbro to do because of the potential for repaints. I know that the cost of tooling a new sculpt would be shared across multiple releases. You've got Delta Squad, you've got appearances in different animated series as well, and of course they're just a little bit fun for army building as well. They're just really fun clone troopers in general. As a personal fan of the Republic Commando squad, I really want to see this done. Of course, we got that squad pack many years ago, but of course the Vintage Collection has really honed in articulation and paint apps. It would be fantastic to see these guys in the new Vintage Collection line.
Number 33, the client from the very first episode of The Mandalorian. This guy made it into our honorable mention list from our top 25. We think that he is one that we could definitely do with having in our Mandalorian lineup.
As we talked about earlier, the Mandalorian series is heavily represented through the Vintage Collection line of figures, but strangely the client is absent, even though he was made as a larger Black Series 6-inch scale figure. His absence here in the Vintage Collection line is oddly a little bit confusing. I really hope that Hasbro goes back and makes this Season 1 character in the line so we can really finish out those scenes.
Number 32, Darth Malak from Knights of the Old Republic.
I am such a big fan of Knights of the Old Republic. I always love to see characters from the game in modern collectible format, no matter what it is. So of course I love to see Darth Malak being so high up on this year's March Madness list. There is a figure that was released quite some years ago, but it doesn't really stand up well compared to modern detailing. And of course he is one of those characters that again transcends their original source material. Even if you have never played the original KOTOR game, he is still very popular and really cool. We did get a recent Black Series figure, so again, I would love to see a modern Vintage Collection version of him as well.
And he pairs well with Darth Revan, who we do have from the Vintage Collection line. Number 31, Kira from Solo, A Star Wars Story. Now, I think Kira's inclusion here means that fans would be quite keen to see almost any version of this character represented in the Vintage Collection line. I think there's particular demand for some of her later appearances, such as the one shown on the screen here wearing that strong, brightly coloured red cape.
Kira did appear on our top 25 list, but I was really torn between her red cape appearance from the Solo movie and her Crimson Dawn outfit from the comics, and ultimately I went with the comic look because it is so striking and I really like it. But of course, I would absolutely love to have a new Vintage Collection version of her iconic red cape from the film as well.
Number 30, Plo Koon from the prequel trilogy.
Like Ki-Adi-Mundi earlier on this list, Plo Koon is one of those interesting alien Jedi characters that does get a little bit more heavily featured than some of the other background Jedi. Of course, with his connection to Ahsoka Tano and his involvement in the Clone Wars also makes him a little bit more prominent than some of the other Jedi. It would be really nice to have an updated version of him in the TVC line.
Number 29, the AT-AT driver or AT-AT driver, depending on your point of view, from The Empire Strikes Back. Now, although we've had a few releases of this character over the decades going right back to the Kenner Vintage era, he hasn't been done in quite some time, and I think given the popularity of Stormtroopers and other Imperial characters, that this guy would sell very well, and there'd actually be quite a bit of demand to get a couple of them at a time. We know that the Imperial Snow Trooper, also from The Empire Strikes Back, another Imperial Trooper variant, has been released fairly recently, and that is a very popular and very nicely well done figure. We think the same approach could be taken with the AT-AT driver, and I think that he would sell very well, and that speaks to his representation at number 29 on this list.
Especially since he has so many sort of little painted details and sculpted details on his chest box and that very detailed helmet. I think he would look absolutely amazing in the Vintage Collection line, and even though you're not going to army build this one quite as much as other Trooper variants, I think he's so iconic. That Hoth battle scene is just awesome. If you have any AT-AT vehicle, you're going to want to have some really cool drivers to go with it.
Number 28, Chancellor Palpatine from Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. The Jedi arrest scene, where he famously utters the memeable line, "So it's treason then."
Again, I think this would be the perfect choice for a figure to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Episode 3. It is an iconic scene, and I would love to see them pack this one in with a few accessories. Of course, this is where we see Sidious using his lightsaber, but later on, this is the same outfit when he is dueling Mace Windu using Force Lightning, and he gets the Force scarring on his face. So you could get swappable hands with Force Lightning and a swappable face portrait for that different scarred look as well. I think that would give so many options. People could buy two of them, so you can do both scenes. Of course, you can put Jedi with him for the arrest, Mace Windu and Anakin for the later scenes. This one just seems so obvious to do to celebrate Episode 3.
Number 27, Neil from Skeleton Crew. Now, we talked about the kids from the Skeleton Crew absolutely having to be done in the Vintage Collection line. Neil has broken away from the pack a little bit. He's appearing quite a bit higher than some of the other characters. We talked about KB at number 64 and the others nearly making it onto the list. But obviously Neil has a very unique level of popularity.
Neil and the other kids from Skeleton Crew are available in the Black Series line, and I hate to play favorites, but you know, I want figures available in both formats for fans of either line. I think this one is really obvious. I just hope it's just a matter of time for Hasbro to work their way through each of the main characters from the Skeleton Crew in the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch line as well.
And speaking of popular characters from the Skeleton Crew, number 26, SM33.
It's kind of odd that he is so conspicuously absent from so many collectible lines. Not in the Lego set, not in the Funko Pop vinyl line. We're finally getting just a few pieces here or there sort of being announced. He is so central and so important to the lineup. You can't really have the kids without Smee as well. So he's got some really cool details. I would love to see this one in the Vintage Collection line. Fingers crossed this year.
Number 25, the Jedi Temple Guard from the Clone Wars animated series. This is a character that only appeared a few times in grand total in this series, but something about their overall design and their role makes their appearance quite impactful, and they are quite a popular character.
Because of their masks, they appear quite anonymous, so you can army build them. And of course, the really cool double-bladed lightsabers as well makes them really fun to buy a couple of. So I really do hope that we get to see these ones, especially with that little connection to the Grand Inquisitor as well. I think that makes them really mysterious and quite fun.
Number 24 features another Palpatine variant, Emperor Palpatine from Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, the Sith Eternal version. This version of Palpatine as seen on the planet Exegol also appeared on our personal top 25 list.
Technically, he has two different looks on Exegol. One where he is like a little less fully formed, connected to a lot of tubes and contraptions. Though of course, if you're going to make an action figure version, this final form with his red and black robes would be much easier to do, and this is where he really has some interesting action scenes where he's shooting Force Lightning at Rey. So I think in terms of a dynamic action figure display, this one is probably the easier and perhaps more interesting version of those two looks to make. But of course, I do hope that maybe one day we'll get one of those versions of Palpatine connected to all of those contraptions. But I think this one is so important to really finish that scene with Rey and Ben Solo.
Number 23, the second Sister Inquisitor from Jedi Fallen Order, another character that appeared in our top 25 list. We have a few characters in the Gaming Greats line from the Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor lineups, but not the second Sister Inquisitor just yet. She did appear in the Black Series some time ago. Very interesting design that translates well into action figure format. but she could be added to the Vintage Collection line as well to help fill out some of those scenes with Cal Kestis and co.
As a fan of Star Wars video games, I'm really happy to see good representation of video games in the Vintage Collection line, though of course this is often in the form of repaints and repacks with trooper and droid variants. I really want to see more main characters from the video games coming through, like earlier on the list we had Darth Malak. I think the second sister would be fantastic, and of course you can also add her to an Inquisitorius lineup as well.
Number 22, Carson Teva in his X-Wing pilot gear. This character appeared on our top 25 list. He is one that we'd very much like to see done in action figure format. He's a fun character that's made a number of appearances across a couple of different series, and clearly we're not the only ones that want to see him translated into action figure form.
Even if you're not fully building out every scene from The Mandalorian or the Ahsoka live action series, he is wearing iconic original trilogy era X-Wing garb, so you could use him as a background army builder for any of those sort of rebel briefing scenes where rebel pilots appear. He's got a really cool helmet. He was a really fun character in those modern live action series. I really want to add this one to my Mandalorian and Ahsoka series, so technically I need a couple of this figure.
Number 21, Omega from the Bad Batch. Now Omega's inclusion at this level kind of represents the demand for almost any version of her in the Vintage Collection format. Obviously there's been a lot of conversation and demand about getting Bad Batch characters in general into the Vintage Collection, and Omega is included in that list.
As a big fan of the Bad Batch and of Omega herself, she was on our top 25 list, and I couldn't really pick which one of her outfits I wanted first. I'll basically take any of them. Of course, she's got some really interesting weapons and accessories, but she is such an important part of the Bad Batch. I don't think you can do a lineup of action figures without her, so she's so important to have in this lineup.
Number 20, Savage Opress from the Clone Wars.
With both Darth Maul and Asajj Ventress being featured so heavily in the Clone Wars, I really enjoyed the Dathomir story arcs with the Night Sisters and Night Brothers, and I really enjoyed this new character of Savage Opress in the Clone Wars. He is so distinct. He's got an interesting storyline, a really interesting look. I think it'd be really fun to have in the Vintage Collection line, and of course, more figures with lightsabers always looks cool.
Number 19, the Jedi Master version of Obi-Wan Kenobi from Episode 3.
While of course everyone has their favorite era of Obi-Wan Kenobi, whether you like his recent live action series, Old Ben from the original trilogy, or the prequels, you can't deny that he is essential for Revenge of the Sith. I would love to see this one done with a soft goods Jedi robe, so you could take it off and do that iconic Mustafar duel with Anakin, especially again, the 20th anniversary of Episode 3. This one feels like a no-brainer to release this year.
Number 18, Dryden Voss from Solo A Star Wars Story. Dryden appeared on our personal top 25 list, although there are a number of characters from Solo A Star Wars Story that have been made or haven't been made that we would like to see in the Vintage Collection. Dryden Voss hasn't been done before in this scale, so we would like to see him in the Vintage Collection.
He is the main villain in this film, and it's not like he stands there and talks. He does have weapons, he does have action fight scenes. It's kind of a bit confusing why he hasn't appeared in the Vintage Collection line, or in fact any 3.75 inch line. I don't mind that he was missing from the older Solo line of figures because they were unfortunately 5-point of articulation, but I think he's long overdue by now.
Number 17, the ever-popular Expanded Universe character, Mara Jade.
Mara Jade is like Darth Revan, two Expanded Universe characters that have really transcended their original source material, and no matter what format they are released in, as collectibles, they are always popular. There have been several versions of Mara Jade made in different action figure formats over the years, but I don't think any of them are particularly the definitive version that I think Hasbro is capable of making. She has quite a few different outfits, and honestly, I don't mind any of them in action figure form.
We have a few Rogue One characters coming up in this next cluster, starting off with number 16, Bodhi Rook from Rogue One. Bodhi Rook has been done in action figure format before, previously in the 5-point of articulation format, but that figure in particular suffers quite badly in terms of overall accuracy and doesn't stand up well to the modern Vintage Collection style.
I think especially with the release of Andor Series 1 and leading into the release of Andor Series 2, it's really making fans a and collectors reflect on Rogue One, because we're going to be leading straight into it, and really noticing the gaps in the vintage collection line. We need a good representation of each of those main characters from Rogue One in the modern figure line.
Number 15, Two Tubes, also from Rogue One. This entry into the countdown actually represents two different characters, both Benthic and Edrio Two Tubes, who are brothers in Saw Gerrera's team of rebels. This new alien species was a standout design in Rogue One that everyone's quite familiar with. They are quite prominent in a lot of different materials, and as I say, their distinct look gives them quite a bit of popularity, I think. And as I mentioned, this entry on the list represents two different characters, so it's an easy sell for Hasbro to get more than one sale for this particular sculpt. Number 14, Sima Lu, the Imperial Dignitary from Return of the Jedi. Now, Sima Lu has a kind of interesting look. He has some fairly plain apparel compared to a lot of the other Imperials that we see in Return of the Jedi. But there is demand for this character because he did first appear in the vintage Kenner line back in the 80s, and he has not been made in action figure format since.
Considering the whole vibe of the vintage collection is so heavily inspired by the original Kenner action figures, I know we're not the only fans that want to see every single original Kenner figure released in the vintage collection line, so of course this one needs to be on that list.
Another Rogue One character jumping in at number 13, Saw Gerrera. Saw Gerrera has made a number of appearances across Star Wars media, including animated series, games, and most recently in Andor, as well as his original Rogue One. He has slightly different looks each time he appears, but I think his Rogue One appearance with his full armor is one of his most striking appearances.
Saw Gerrera was released back in the Rogue One era, unfortunately in that 5-point of articulation line, but because of the complexity of his outfit, I don't think that figure really did him justice. I think he is perfect for the vintage collection line, though I'm a little bit nervous that Hasbro would make him as a deluxe figure like they did in the recent Black Series release of this character.
Number 12, Pong Krell from the Clone Wars.
The character that everyone loves to hate. It was a little bit of a controversial story arc in the Clone Wars animated series, but it left a lasting impression. He is a really interesting looking Jedi with different lightsaber colors. That's always quite cool on display. He didn't quite make our top 25 list, but I did see him quite heavily talked about in online discussions, so it's fun to see him at number 12 on this top 64 finalist list.
Number 11, Peli Motto from The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, who also appeared on our top 25 list.
As I mentioned earlier, the Mandalorian series is heavily represented in the vintage collection line, so it's really surprising to see Peli Motto missing all this time later. She's such a fun character. I thought maybe she was going to be in just one episode, but she does appear quite a few times, and then of course also in the Book of Boba Fett, where she works on Mando's new N1 Starfighter. We have the Starfighter in the vintage collection line as a really cool vehicle, but sadly Peli Motto is still missing. I think she's essential to really fill out a Mandalorian display.
Number 10, C-3PO from Star Wars A New Hope. One of the first characters we actually see on screen in any Star Wars media, and he has been done many times before in this scale, but it's surprising given that he doesn't actually change his look too much, how many different versions and interpretations of his appearance you can actually get. There is some material that suggests we will be seeing a Tatooine version of him in the not too distant future.
We recently got a fantastic wave of vintage collection figures from A New Hope where we got R2-D2, but it was glaringly obvious that C-3PO is sorely missing. I don't know why Hasbro is really dragging their feet. I know a lot of fans really want a VAC metalized, but to be honest at this point I just want a shiny one, even if it is a metallic gold paint.
The inclusion of Ali Orshus at number 9 on this list is very much obviously triggered by the fact that he was teased as a potential pack-in with the HasLab Mos Eisley Cantina, but didn't make the final cut. We know that there are prototype versions of this character, and everybody just wants to see him done and released as an individual figure at this point.
I would be really surprised if Hasbro doesn't eventually release this one. It seems so obvious. They've put all the work into the tooling and creation of this figure. They know that fans want every obscure character to fill out their HasLab Cantina scenes. Maybe we'll see this one released a little bit closer to the final ship date for that incredible playset, but I think it would be odd if they just simply shelve this one and never release it.
Number 8, Echo from the Bad Batch. Almost any version of his armor would be appreciated here, but we should start with his Clone Force 99 version of armor as seen in Season 1.
While we kind of wanted to put just about all of Clone Force 99 on our top 25, it was really hard to finalize our top 25 character wish list for this year's March Madness, and I kind of wanted to put every character from Clone Force 99 on the list, but in the end we went with Wrecker sort of being the representative character from that. If I'd had just a few more spaces, I would have put all of them, so it's really fun to see Echo so high here at number 8.
And we clearly understand the demand for this character. Everybody wants to see more Bad Batch in the Vintage Collection line. Number 7, Asajj Ventress from the Clone Wars.
Asajj is such a fun, standout character from the Clone Wars, and while she has lots of different outfits, and honestly, I wouldn't mind her recent appearance in the Bad Batch either, I think I would go with her most iconic look, with cloak, large belt buckle, and sash hanging down the front. There is something really cool about this character. I've loved her ever since she was introduced in the Micro series all those years ago. She is so important for the Clone Wars story and display. I would love to see a new updated version of her.
Number 6, Tech from the Bad Batch. Not much to say here that we haven't already covered, other than that we need to see all of Clone Force 99 in the Vintage Collection, and Tech has made it in at number 6 on this list. Number 5, Baze Malbus from Rogue One. Now Baze was done in the 5-point of articulation era, but I think some characters suffered more in that era than others, in particular those that had particularly bulky costumes or accessories such as Baze. It's a version that would translate much better in the Vintage Collection than it did back in that 5-point of articulation with limited detailing and limited overall scale.
He's in that same sort of category as Saw Gerrera, with a really unique and detailed costume that I think would just look really nice in the modern era of articulation and paint detailing.
Number 4, Luthen Rail from the Andor series, who also appeared in our top 25 list. Now Luthen comes pretty much in a civilian outfit rather than interesting armor or gear, so it's interesting to see him appear so highly on the list. There's obviously demand for this character to fill out people's Andor collections and displays.
Luthen Rail is just so important to the story arc of Andor, even if he's not directly in that episode. And of course he does have two distinct different looks, both his sort of underground rebel look and his Coruscant antiquities dealer disguise. I think of course in terms of action displays, his rebel look would be the one that I would hope for first, and I'm really excited to see him so high on this list at number 4. I think it really speaks to the fandom and wanting to really build out Andor, because we're so sadly lacking in Andor figures. I'm really hoping that Hasbro's just kind of holding back and will release a whole lot to tie in with Andor Season 2 coming up very soon.
Number 3, Crosshair from the Bad Batch. Again, a couple of different versions are possible here, but let's start with the Clone Force 99 version of his armor.
Crosshair is a really interesting character with some really complex story arc development throughout the series, and of course we have 2 figures of him in the Black Series 6-inch line, so it's kind of sad that he is yet to be represented in the 3.75-inch line. He is so important to the Bad Batch series. I'm so excited to see him at number 3, and again he would have been on our list, but we ran out of spaces, so we used Wrecker as a stand-in for the whole Bad Batch series of characters.
Number 2, Wrecker from the Bad Batch. We can see a bit of a clear pattern forming here. There is undeniable demand for the Bad Batch in the Vintage Collection line. We included Wrecker in our top 25 list, not just as a proxy for all of the Bad Batch, but he is possibly the one we would like to see the most. He's a very fun character with a very interesting variation on the standard Clone Trooper armor design.
It's really fun to see that the 4 missing Clone Force 99 Bad Batch characters were all within the top 21, and indeed Omega was the only one on this list outside of the top 10, so it really does show just how much the Vintage Collection collecting community really wants more Bad Batch characters in the 3.75-inch line.
Number 1 on the list didn't quite make it to our top 25, but we are actually very pleased to see it included and to make it all the way up to the number 1 slot. the Stranger from the Acolyte.
We didn't put it on our list, not because we don't really want it, we do, but because I think this one it has to be done. It has to be done. We recently got Master Indara in the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch line, so it would be odd for Hasbro to continually sort of drip feed out figures from the Acolyte without making the one that everyone has at the top of their wish list. Everyone loves the design of the Stranger. Even if you don't want any other figures from the series, the Stranger is just really cool. That iconic helmet, he was just such a really fascinating character. Hasbro has to make this one.
Now, we fully commend the SWTVC team for putting in so much time and work to collate this list. One thing that really stood out to me that I found particularly interesting was the absolute breadth of different source material that all of these characters are coming from. I think it speaks to the popularity of all of the Star Wars material that is still out there. This is a pretty solid data pool coming from 30,000 plus entries. So I think this is a very valuable data pool that is a very useful and fun resource.
We know that not everyone has the time to sit down and come up with a definitive top 25 wish list of characters. I know it took us several days of discussion, so I really appreciate just the enormous task of the team behind TVC March Madness for doing all of this incredible data pooling, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of each round of voting. It's going to be really interesting to see which figure comes out on top this year.
On that note, thanks for hanging out with us as we chatted about the top 64 most wanted Star Wars characters revealed for the 2025 TVC March Madness voting tournament.
We hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars action figure fun. May the Force be with you. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, check out our other videos, and subscribe for alerts about new uploads. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.